Welcome to the Workforce Situation Room, where we spotlight some of the promising and innovative solutions that address some of our most pressing workforce and economic challenges, getting in the way of our mission at Workforce Solutions Borderplex. That mission is to power the people with the tools and opportunity to reach their potential in the workforce, and ultimately, our goal is to develop area businesses and the economy. I'm Bianca, your host, and I stand alongside our ladies of leadership at Workforce Solutions Borderplex with Leila Melendez, our CEO, Alma Aranda, Workforce Development Director, and Karina Castillo, our Senior Research Analyst. In this room, we all believe every situation has a solution. Here's the situation. You'll recall in episode 3 that we dove into remote repercussions when it came to the impact of COVID-19 on education. Given it's such a meaty topic, today we release part 2. After speaking with some adults that are parents and also work in the education system, while students are definitely a major concern, consideration for parents, educators, and faculty are still a must in this conversation, even if it's to uncover some plot twists that reveal the pandemic tragedies may subtly be offering solutions for the education system.
I'm in the Bel Air community, right? And so we've got a mix of kids. We've got kids that are in the HP and kids that are higher socioeconomic status. And then we got kids that live in shelters because that's where their moms ended up, and it's just like, when you don't hear from those kids, you start to get a little nervous. You're like, are you okay? Have you eaten today? Because when they're in class, you can ask them that and you can give them a shirt. If they need a new shirt, you can work with them. Like this, we don't know. And it's like, everybody's complaining about not getting work and everybody's complaining about the kids getting behind. And academically, yes, sure, they're going to miss out on a lot. But socially, emotionally, these kids are going to hurt. 10 years from now, those kids are going to enter the workforce with a whole slew of problems.
But we're also seeing the emotional aspect of the effect on these kids and how it's affected them and how in turn we need to provide them that comfort for something that is so uncertain. There's so many situations where it just breaks my heart. Like, for example, we had a little girl who recently lost her father to COVID and she wasn't logging on. Those are the kids that we worry about because we don't know how they're coping. And we've heard these horror stories about parents in the background are fighting or there's gunshots and there's these things happening at home. And we can't provide them, 100%, protection from this.
We had a teacher, like, you talk about like fighting in the background. There was a gun that was pulled via a Zoom screen, and the trauma, there's trauma there too, right? It's like these are things that we never would have interacted with.
And what can you do? Like, you're seeing it happen. And it's crazy because I feel like it's a blessing and a curse to kind of be in this situation where you can see into the home. Mm-hmm. Teachers, for the most part, they see them all day, every day, and especially the ones that are exclusively virtual. And they can see the living conditions. It's not just something that you suspect anymore. It's something that validates, like, this kid doesn't have the best home life. Like, this kid's, they're living in the projects or, there's a bare minimum, like nobody's watching them during the day. There are some kids that are like that, where it's just siblings home all day and parents have to work. Yeah, you have 14-year-old sister watching the kindergarten.
Right. They're all there.
Right. And that's a struggle, and that's a struggle for everyone. And seeing them come back, it takes a toll on everybody, because there's that, again, like, there's that anxiety of potential sickness. There is the mental health status of the child or even the family who's lost somebody, and it's traumatic to have to bring them back. And then TDA wants to bring those particular kids that are falling behind back. Mm-hmm. And you're not taking into account, like, the psychological processing that's going behind
even everything. The trauma from all the media, right, that happens on teachers. Because I don't know if you guys remember, at the very beginning of quarantine, it's because teachers don't want to go back. It's because they're super selfish. They just got 6 months off, they should stay, they need to come back. And you're like, that's not the case at all. So many of us beating yourself up every night, staying up until midnight, answering emails, answering phone calls, answering messages, things that were normally you could cut off a time and say, I'm not going to work anymore. Mm-hmm. And now it's it doesn't matter what time it is. And then feeling like you had to, if you didn't answer, who else was going to answer? Constant stress of am I doing the right thing? What else can I do? Can I add something else? It's a lot. It's a lot. And I think if the scores aren't good enough, it's going to be your fault.
But I think the stress that they're under right now, just for the sake of testing, they're looking for other routes and they're looking for ways out. And I have a friend that became a realtor during the pandemic. And these are people that are all about public service, but we're losing them because of the pressure that you're putting on them just to get through this year. And it's insane. It's really sad.
The first thing I kind of wanted to start on that really I wasn't expecting to hear from these two women was, yes, there's education effect, but also being able to look within and looking inside the homes of these students and seeing more and how that was impacting them. So I did want to touch a little bit on that. And there was a national survey done with teachers by the University of Maryland, and they kind of just looked over the moods of what these teachers were feeling since COVID started. And I kind of want to see what you all think and talk to me about what we heard in terms of being able to look inside the homes as far as the impact on teachers.
I think this reflects somebody that is in a fight or flight situation. You're under stress, but you have to push through it. And it's like a crisis. You would probably see this during a crisis where you have to have an outcome. You have to solve something, but it's scary. It's horrible. It's unknown. You just got to get through it. That's what this reflects.
Crises are usually short-lived. So here we're dealing with perpetual crisis and just kind of what you're starting to see.
You solve one thing and then comes another one. Also, you solve and then another issue again, and it goes weekly and weekly. All the issues that we have to remediate or alleviate for our family and for our life.
And that to the fight or flight aspect, and then that's our reaction. And it's a very human reaction. But the after effects of that, it's daunting to have that kind of be on that kind of response, especially with what you just said, it's perpetual. So the after effects are going to be really interesting to see how that really does play out in the long term. What's going to manifest out of that.
And these are emotional reactions, psychological reactions, which have an impact on health, physical reactions. So when you have a crisis and you have to just deal with it, it's exhausting afterwards. You have to decompress. You have to how many of us actually, decompress after a vacation? Sometimes vacations are stressful and you need a day to take off from not doing anything, right? And that's a good thing, but you're on hyper mode. Mm-hmm. And like you said, this is a prolonged crisis. There's been very little time to reset, to regroup. We're now, quote unquote, back or returning. It's still not over. And I mentioned something last week about, you heard over and over, what helped get people through the year was this phrase that we just kept hearing over and over. We're all in this together, right? Are we still all in this together? I just feel like it's every man for himself now. I hope we're still in this together and trying to figure out, what do we do from here together? I think we allowed ourselves a lot of the pain, the hurt, the discomfort, because we were all going through it at the same time. But now that there's a sense of going back, it just feels as we have to figure it out. We have to find our balance on our own. How are you finding your balance, Karina? How are you finding your balance, Bianca? And sharing that and being there for one another as we figure those things out.
And sometimes before you were thinking, okay, only these students, they need only tutoring to catch up, like on the different subjects they are failing. What we really need besides the tutoring, they need access to all these areas on healthcare, food security, stable housing. All these may affect their grades, because we only look at the area of the school, but we need to look the other factors that are affecting them to success in their education. We were talking with Carlos Gallinar 2 weeks ago, and he was telling us that his wife is working in a company as a psychologist. And he told us that there is a waiting list for patients of 1,800 people to talk to a psychology or social worker. That we need to be improving or having more support to the students with these social workers, counselors, psychologists to help these students help at any time. I was hearing this video for this teacher, and she was saying, I was answering emails in the night, and sometimes I don't want to answer any more emails, but she said, I need to answer. I need to help them, because if I don't help them, who is going to help them? That's why we need this group of people that can help at any hour, night, morning, any time, to help them to remediate their what they're having issues.
And I think we talked about this a little bit last session, but you're right. And what I found interesting, and it kind of all comes into one, is what the school nurse said. The second girl was a school nurse, and she saw it from a way different perspective, but also saw suicide calls. She saw anxiety calls, panic attacks that she would have to deal with for those that did do the hybrid version when she was seeing students, even some of the teachers. And what I'm seeing here is opportunity in the sense that the teachers were so stressed out that they were already considering shifting careers because they were done. So you're opening up positions in teaching. And then also the 53 and older that left, you're opening up positions in teaching from those that retired early. And then you also have a really huge need for psychologists. So it's almost like there's just this need, just almost labeled COVID response in these positions, in these jobs and industries. So I think that's interesting, where we could actually have some type of involvement as a workforce development board.
I think even stepping back a little bit further, when we're looking at the data and some of the effects that's coming out, we're not exactly sure how that's going to play out. But it reminds me of the whole pendulum theory type of thing. And, when Layla was talking right now, we're not necessarily out of this yet. I think initially we were really craving, I myself, I got really comfortable not wearing a mask at all. I was like, I'm vaccinated. I know we're not at that threshold, for herd immunity, but it's all of those things. And now you're talking about the Delta variant, on top of everything, right? And I think we kind of jumped forward instead of stepping forward, but it definitely feels like we're going to have to step back a little bit. And that's concerning, definitely, as far as the topic of, what is the impact to the students and the education sector, faculty, teachers, the whole gamut. But I just don't feel like the pendulum is actually swinging back to some normalcy yet, as much as we're craving it. I think that's something that we're going to have to really look at. But the data is not necessarily revealing what we need to know yet, right? So there's a lot of assumptions, and I think our human nature is to try to be very positive, even though, some people are a little bit more cynical than others. We crave to be together, but it's still really going to be interesting to see what's going to come out of it. So I'm still, for me personally, in my role, is still really kind of be on a listening mode before we jump with a solution.
You say listening mode, and I'm going to pierce you with the shocker of the listening sessions that we've been doing with the youth. For those of you listening, we've been sitting with a group of young individuals, young teenagers, young adults, people in college, and just giving them a platform to talk and give us an idea of what they're needing. And rather than telling them what to do, we're listening. And I almost fell out of my chair when I heard this, but some of the feedback from the early reports is that 50% of kids, after hearing all the horror stories that those educators talked about, 50% of the kids actually prefer being at home, isolated, away from everybody, and not dealing with their teachers. That floored me. I did not expect to hear that. And one of our staffers, and I want to go ahead and play it for you guys really quickly, but
so before you play it, I wanted to give you some of my reactions to what we heard earlier. What I sensed from the folks that we heard earlier was they got a sense of people's lives through the camera. And everybody got a sense of people's lives through the camera. Us as coworkers, we got to know one another's dogs, you know what I mean? But we got a sense, the teachers got a sense of the reality of life. And I think that that's something when you really take this, whatever approach, and look at it from a really distant level, and you look at the humanity here, and it's easy to compartmentalize and say, right now, I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to be a worker, and that's what I'm going to do. But when you look into a person's life, right, you're there and you're helping and you're teaching, but you also see the human and the reality of another person's life. And as social organizations, social services, education, we're government agencies, but we're for the people. That's what government is. It's supposed to serve lives and the people. And I think that we should have always designed our system to not just teach the human how to do something, but how to absorb how all of those things, all of our social systems. Our social system needs to help prevent unemployment. And when it happens, be resilient to it. And that's not something that you measure on a report. It's having a conversation with people about their lives. So you really do have to break it down to a very basic human function versus a bureaucratic and government function. And I think this is what's disappointing. It's too late. We're off and running again in the same old thing because the measures are still there. Now we have to get back on track. Funding is there. Blah, blah. So the same pressures are coming back and everybody's just going to go back to the same system and that's it. And we need to have redesigned everything. Everything needed to have been redesigned. This was the year to do that. Education, healthcare, work, everything should have been rethought of before just plastering on something to show. And it's not just, I mean, maybe it is just our country. I think it's just human nature. You right away put things in place to show that we're successful.
But you know what, Layla? But we're the one, like we're back to normal, right? We're the ones that are kind of holding the systems together. We're saying, okay, we've got measures, we've got this, but look at what's happening to us, from a workforce perspective, our job seekers, our UI claimants. We keep bracing ourselves for this influx of people. Maybe they don't want that anymore. And, the school systems, they have a severe decline in enrollment, so as much as we're like trying to be like, hey, get back on it. Like, this is this is life. We got to do what we got to do. Right. And and all the people in the systems are saying that there's definitely an outcome on the flip side of the coin.
Arms crossed. No,
they're resisting.
That's
they're
right.
not going to do it.
One of the reasons why. So I don't know if you saw this yesterday, but it was in something that I read, or media report or something on either on TV or that I saw it online. But the reason why a lot of service workers don't want to go is because of us, the customers, because we're rude, we're temperamental, we don't treat one another
like humans. So when the customer is always right, we're being told you're not. You're mean. I'm not gonna, it's $10 an hour, even $15 an hour, maybe even $18 an hour is not worth you not treating me like a person. Again, you strip down the money, the measure, all of those things, it's human nature. That's what everything has to come back down to. And it's just, we have to accept it. You have to accept it. But that's hard for us to swallow. Us as a society and us, I think as Americans, it is extremely difficult for us to check the ego and say, we're not so perfect. No, we are number one in the world. We're number one in the world. We're number one in the world in everything. And we cannot be vulnerable. And that is the danger zone. That I just got a light bulb because with the youth listening sessions, and the 50% rate of kids preferring to stay home.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
What I heard from these reports was they don't have to deal with their teachers. It's an issue with authority. It's an issue with how they're being taught. If it's not the teacher herself, it's the system of the compartmentalizing.
And there's got to be some after effect of what you experienced. I mean, we heard stories where students were like, "Oh, the teacher doesn't care. Nobody cares, so I'm not going to care." And they're still very young and developing. But it's interesting because right now, I'm going through this situation with my daughter who's goes to school out of town. It's finding a place for her to live. And I'm like, are you going to be in class, in college? And she's like, yes. She's like, if everybody turns in their vaccination and we get to this level, then it's in class. She's like, if not, we're virtual. And I told her, I said, I don't think kids are going to turn in their vaccination record because there's probably a big group of kids who don't want to go back in class for a lot of reasons. Even the barriers just to sometimes get there. I mean, so yes, there's a lot of, after effects of, and it's intrusive in the Zoom calls and everything, but that's something that they dealt with. And I think you get accustomed to that. Even us as workers, we're trying to do this hybrid, and I think I'm preferring remote. I mean, I'm still trying to transition into the benefits of in-person and not, but I think that, when you look at somebody, especially somebody who's younger, who's still developing, a year and a half is a big chunk of their life in those
habitual
really formative years.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's definitely, that it seems, it's surprising, but now it also makes sense.
It makes sense, right? And let's talk to Karina really quickly. She actually got data points on enrollment levels where we're talking about this resistance movement maybe, and maybe that's not the entire factor of why enrollment is dropping, but maybe we're also, we have other issues that we need to address as a workforce. So tell us a little bit about what you found out.
Yes. In El Paso Community College, the enrollment decreased from fall 2019 to fall 2020, 10%. On 2019, there were 29,000 enrollments. On 2020, on fall of 2020, there were 26,000 enrollments, 3,000 less enrollments at EPCC.
3,000 less students.
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
And UTEP decreased also by 3%. And talking about only enrollments, you have the stop outs. We also
define what stop outs are for those that don't know.
Yes, sometimes the students they are in education and then leave the education either at higher education, like in UTEP, because they cannot continue education because they have financial issues and they stop. They don't continue even at the last year of their education, of their higher education. They leave the school because of different necessities, and this is the stop outs. Either EPCC, we have data also at UTEP. At EPCC, we have 22% stop outs. And then at UTEP, it's 15%. And this is from fall 2020 to spring 2021.
So we're seeing impact of COVID on education on the youth in a really interesting way where people preferred hybrid or preferred remote, but we're also seeing a pretty devastating impact on higher education with the immediate workforce coming in, right? So that's going to be huge for us in filling positions and in making sure that these large companies, higher paying companies are getting a good talent pool because they're either not finishing college or they're resuming to lower paying jobs. So what do we do? How do we respond? Where do we start?
We've been, I myself included, with this COVID and the economic impact and, calling it a COVID recession. It had been a job seekers market for quite some time because there was more job opportunities prior to COVID than people looking for work. And I remember one of the interviews I said, it could flip. It could flip, very soon. It still hasn't flipped. It is still very much a job seekers market. And so that's something really very distinct. In looking back and doing some research, we haven't seen that type of results from a recession or, like an economic crisis where it's still a job seekers market. And that says a lot about, what customers want, what we're doing as customers. And then employers are really going to have to come to terms with that. I think that's going to be really important. I think overall, for different reasons, quality of life was a big thing during COVID, right? As much as we were in this together and help each other, there was a turning point where for a lot of people, I think they really kind of rechecked their values of what they're doing. And I think that's going to be really impactful on the economy, quite honestly. Again, very preliminary things that are out there. How it's going to play out, we don't know. I think the traditional requirements that employers might have had prior might have to shift because people are shifting.
So we can talk about maybe some current quick fixes that we can potentially do as a workforce development board or even recommend to our partners. One that I can think of off the bat that we had a conversation about with childcare and UTEP is the misalignment of scheduling. Just the basic 9 to 5 may not match well with the 7 to 3 school schedules, and more encouragement of the new culture code of telling employers, hey, be a little more flexible so that people can accommodate their kids and their schedule and their education so that 10 years from now, you have somebody that works in their place or similar. So that's one that I can think of. What are some other quick fixes that we've learned from the impact of COVID on education that we could apply or that we could recommend?
I don't know if I brought this up in a previous podcast, and I think other countries do, is have a morning and an evening schedule, right? So some people, students and teachers and administrators are morning people. Put them 7 o'clock in the morning. Great. And then people that are late risers or they don't get their energy until afternoon, put them on a second. Why not? I want to know why not. Mm-hmm. Why can't we? Why is it completely... So why is it so crazy?
The daytime, I mean, that's a really great point. And yes, we did bring it up briefly, but if you think of the whole daytime, it's very outdated because back in when we were more of an agrarian society, you had to kind of really take advantage of sunlight, right? We're not in that world anymore.
Yeah. The basic industrial farmland.
Right? Yeah. I mean, that's the reality. Yeah. And businesses have adjusted to that a little bit. You see, restaurants open later, fast food stores, convenience stores, things like that. So it's possible. It's, based on that demand, I think for those that are in the systems need to kind of acquiesce to that as well. And from a business perspective, what makes more sense? What's our smart move versus this is the way we've always done it. This is the way it works, and trying to enforce that tradition. I just don't think it's going to happen anymore.
Yes, I was thinking on regarding the K-12 students. I think we were not prepared, or the teachers, so all of us were not prepared with the technology. Because we need to be prepared for the future, not for another COVID, or maybe there is another time that we need to work remotely. Because we need to be prepared. Yes, flooding, all disasters. We need to be prepared, and to use technology, all the teachers, and be able to teach them, and then to have a different learning system when you provide the instruction remotely.
Yeah, alternative.
Because there's sometimes they only give projects and boom, they do it up by themselves, but they don't have this learning process for the students to catch up and understand, and then work with the project that they were assigned to.
That's true. Like a remote work 101 for teachers as part of their education curriculum, so that they know that's something that could immediately be implemented.
For students too, for families, because if you got your kids there, how that's going to play out. I know that there's a lot of different reasons. Some have logic of why the kids need to be back in the classroom. We know that already. And I agree with a lot of it, but I still think that you're going to have families that if there's an option, if there's a choice, or even if it's not a better option, they just might not run. And as Karina mentioned, the numbers say a lot.
And also a lot of students, they didn't have the internet, the Wi-Fi. All the schools, they have to have funding to be able to provide all the students with technology and access to internet. Because if they don't have access to all these, they won't be able to continue progress and see what is happening in the world.
I mean, could we we have a remote work 101 pilot that we're just starting where we're teaching people their basics, the basics of how to work from home, the type of broadband, all types of resources. Could we do that for UTEP and EPCC or all the
potentially,
teachers, or maybe, just have a discussion? Is that something we can?
Yeah, we can bring it up. We can bring it up and pilot it and see what happens from it. Yeah. I mean, we can throw the idea out there and see who's willing to be the guinea pigs and see what happens. Yep.
Because I could imagine that a lot of the stress that these teachers dealt with aside from being able to look into the home and the anxiety and the extra work, I know my sister was up till midnight herself on a daily basis, having to email every single parent of the kid that didn't show up, and they were responsible. If there was no attendance, the teachers were still responsible. So I would imagine, though, that the remote stuff, the technology stuff, was stressful for those that had no idea of what was going on.
I mean, even with all of that, right? The generalization of data. But if you go back and think even more, like beyond the number of who was really affected. Yesterday, I was on a call with an organization that helps domestic abuse survivors. And we're talking about their shelter needs and its families. And, as we're talking about this, I thought, what did those children do? When we're talking about, being on a Zoom call and feeling a little intrusive. And I remember even my daughters were like, you've got to have your bedroom right, or you've got a funky background or something. You know what I mean? It's all of those things. And I thought, imagine the impact on some of those kids that were in shelters and we had no choice. Those are the things that need to also be looked at, beyond the numbers, and back to Leila's point, the human side of it. It's going to be really important that we don't lose touch of that. And just in essence, to kind of normalize and get back and put the systems back in place. I think if we lose sight of that, we're going to hurt down the line.
But so you have two kids at your house.
I have two kids. I have a 12-year-old and I have a 16-year-old. My 12-year-old has dyslexia and has always struggled in school because of that. With the virtual learning, she got all A's and B's and actually enjoyed it a lot more because she was able to concentrate on her schooling and not have to deal with the teacher portion of it. She asked questions, but if she had really big questions, she asked me, and I was able to help her. My son completely bombed everything. And I would ask him on a daily, did you do your work? Did you do your work? Did you do your work? And he would say yes. And he didn't. So now he's in summer school because he had a really difficult time trying to concentrate.
Was it motivation?
I think it was just motivation, or I think it was they're not looking at me, so I don't have to do it type thing. I think he needed that face-to-face push from the teachers.
What would you say of the disciplinary levels between your son and daughter?
I actually struggle more with discipline with my daughter. My son usually listens to everything I say it once and he does it. But this virtual learning just didn't work for him.
Wow.
And usually disciplinary problems, I struggle with her. But with the online school, she just really enjoyed it.
And this was the case with the students that were, you want to say that the 50% that preferred online what was the common denominator?
The common denominator or the one thing that they mentioned throughout this entire thing was, I didn't have to deal with the teacher. I just had to do my work.
What stood out to me was that she had a child with disorders. They succeeded, social disorders. It's almost like we discovered something here that, again, and I keep using silver lining, but, maybe we figured out a solution unintentionally for children with social disorders and helping them succeed academically through a hybrid model or a remote model. So that, for me, that was just, my brain just started going off and do people know this, or is this something that we're just discovering, or have educators figured this out? I know, though, that what's really important is that Biden, I learned, that had signed an executive order at the beginning of his presidency to do a full blanket assessment with the Department of Education of what COVID did to everyone. So hopefully that's something that they pick up, and maybe it's a trend that we're seeing with some students with social disorders. Go ahead, Leila.
So listening to that, right? Her kids are two completely different people, but I'm trying to remember me in school and even just me as an adult. And I think there's some things, especially now, I think in society, where we've maybe not within the systems, but more in society, we're embracing our differences a little bit more, versus when you're in school, man, you've got to conform to the norm. Because if you're not in the same
It's not good to be an outlier.
You're
right?
the outlier. You're the weirdo, right? And we see there are TV shows, movies, everything about, especially in the school system, how the school system was not just a teaching system and a learning system. It was a society. It was part of life for people when you're in that time frame. The socialization system, right? It's a society, and you had to conform, and you had to be this way. Or if you weren't, you were the outlier and you're the outcast. And that's the difference. That's what has to, I think, most importantly, and I'm not an educator. I don't have any experience in education. The closest I came was I ran for school board, and I did that with the intent of like this perspective is it's got to really, the change has to happen from within, and within at the core is the students that have to change it from in outward and say, look, in one household, you have two completely different types of people, and both are completely within their right to have the education system conform to them versus them to conform to the system. Why can't there be a system for these students and a system for this students? I think I mentioned in a previous podcast, the art students that expressed themselves. Those were the doodlers, right? You had some people that had binders that would doodle all day long, and they were artsy, and they excelled in those types of courses, but did really bad maybe in math and English, right? So let them excel where they're going to excel.
Right.
Let them excel where they're going to excel, and not where they're not. Just let it go versus everybody has to get A's and B's on, you have your core and then you have electives. Why do we have those two systems? Just redo it, because you have different people. You have different, and they're little people. They're kids. So they're just being developed, but we're developing them to fit into the society that we as adults think is correct. And we are like full of BS because it's not.
We're not even going to be the same society.
Exactly. As adults, we're like,
are we going to be?
Look at us. I mean, we're adults. And so we're forcing our kids into these structures that are designed, that we've designed ourselves.
Can you imagine like the potential that we're eroding because they're so concerned? I mean, I'll tell you, when I moved schools in the middle, I started off as a super nerd and proud of it at one school. I was in the spelling, like I was competing for the spelling bee. I was like getting ready, but we moved in the middle of the year. I got cut off from the spelling bee because I wasn't in the same school, and I suddenly wasn't the smart kid. And I was starting from scratch, and I thought, okay, what do I do? Nobody talked to me. One person talked to me. To this day, I still remember Mike Gallardo, and he was like my best friend, and I couldn't see well, so he would read the chalkboard for me. I mean, I didn't have anyone. And when I went to recess and I made some little girlfriends, for my survival, because I had to fit in, I thought, who's the coolest and who's the coolest on the blacktop, and who am I going to become friends with? And I spotted them, and I said, that's the group. You guys are nice and you're sweet, but I need to go with the cool kids because that's going to be how I survive school. That was ingrained.
Survive school.
So you don't get bullied.
How sad is that? We have completely failed, right?
Yep.
If that does not turn on the light bulb to us as adults,
right,
that people feel that they have to survive school.
And not surviving the socialization. But I remember, I mean, my kids are a little bit older, but over the last couple of years, in talking to some coworkers or friends who have school-age children, they tell me how nervous, like, and sick their kids get before some of the exams, the state exams, and the pressure that they feel. And one of them was like in second grade, and she ended up getting sick in her stomach. And I mean, so when you're talking about surviving that part too. So I think right now, Bianca, when you said like what's going to be eroded, I think it's happening, or it should happen. And maybe not by the systems people itself, but by the people, right? And that's not, I mean, even like the artsy, like you start seeing a trend for that. Now it's all of a sudden to be really cool to be like out
expressive,
there drawing and doing, expressing yourself in art. And I'm not very artistic, and I'm like, dang, I wish I would have like leaned into that when I was younger. I didn't, But, so it's things like that. It's going to be really, really interesting to see. But I really do hope that we keep these lessons learned, these silver linings, and really kind of develop it as well. It's going to be really vital, I think.
I mean, if we're going the rate that we're going, and if it's anything like last year, we might be back in the same situation in the fall. Hopefully not, but we might. And I have one more thing that stood out to me with Karina's conversation with Carlos and his wife. A waiting list of 1,800 people needing therapy. That's just one organization. 1,800 people in one office need therapy and have to wait for it. I'm sure that's the case across the board with all therapists, even those online ones, the BetterHelp or, yeah. How are we going to, I mean, especially if we go into round 2, how the heck are we going, how the heck are the teachers going to survive?
Well, what's interesting with that, if we delve into that one a little bit, when we were talking to Carlos about some work that he was going, because he's going to do a study on remote work. Mm-hmm. He was sharing with us that his wife is doing remote and she's linked up to an employer, I think out of New York or something like that. Right. And from this organization, they offered her that remote work and the ability to help. And they have this waiting list, but to our point, like, I'm sure we have that need here locally as well. So somebody missed out on, his wife, like being in, like, capitalizing on that opportunity because now she's working for an employer in New York that was able to be flexible to what she needed.
Very interesting, though. We lost the local opportunity to a remote opportunity when she could be helping people here. Wow. I didn't see that one coming. I didn't know she was working in New York. But I see a demand for therapists. Is that a hot job?
It's interesting. For a while, like your sociology majors, your psychology majors, and that was my elected major back then. It became like this kind of, it turned into like a catch-all for a while, right? So that's the shift now. Right now, it's like, it's probably going to be definitely something to go into, right? And it's going to turn into a very much in demand and hot occupation. But for a while there, it was kind of like, well, it's a catch-all. Like if you didn't do this one, just transfer to a psychology major and you can graduate, and it was one of those things. And that's not good. That should have never been the case. But it shows how, as a society, we treated that kind of occupation as well.
Well, I definitely see actionable steps from this conversation within our own organization that we can take. So hopefully we can see those implemented and talk about them in future podcasts. But I think we covered at least the response to those conversations and the plot twist that I mentioned to you all of how some students actually benefited. So I'll look into more data about that. And even if there's a study of like being an a-hole versus being a human, the trends of how beneficial it is to be nice, to be kind.
There was something that came out and they were sharing this at the local level. They had quantified, I'm not sure exactly how, but they're projecting that students, they're behind about a year and a half from being out of school.
We're really going to see that coming in. Even the social stuff, I mean, kids were already inundated on their screens and not playing outside. I always tell my niece, why don't you go play outside? Like we used to play outside. My mom wouldn't let us back into the house until the sun came down to eat dinner. I was not allowed inside the house. So
they wanted to get me inside the house, but I couldn't. We played like everything out there, like tag for hours.
Rollerblades, hula hoops. This conversation is far from over, and we'll continue to have it as a workforce development organization. But I'm glad that we were actually able to extract actionable items that we can start to implement as solutions. We hope that the conversation has stimulated ideas within your wheelhouse, and we encourage you to bring them up to your friends, colleagues, get this solution snowball going. Remember, we're always open to your thoughts, expertise, and especially critiques. It's the only way that we'll tackle these problems successfully. We don't always have a choice in the situations we face, but you do have a choice in subscribing to solutions. Join the Workforce Situation Room on your favorite podcast platform and hit subscribe where you'll find a solution to every situation.